Before the sun rose on the final year of World War II, the world was already holding its breath. Across continents, cities smoldered in silence. Once busy streets had turned into fields of rubble, twisted steel, and broken memories. Smoke still drifted from ruins where families once lived, laughed, and dreamed. The air itself seemed heavy with grief, as if the planet was exhausted from years of endless killing. Millions were already dead, soldiers buried in foreign soil, civilians lost beneath collapsing buildings, entire generations erased before they had a chance to live. And yet, despite all this suffering, the war was not finished. History would later remember this moment as the point where victory and catastrophe stood side by side, separated by a single decision. America had won in Europe. Nazi Germany was collapsing under the relentless pressure of Allied forces. Once feared armies were surrendering. Flags were changing over captured cities. Prisoners staggered out of camps, barely alive, as the world began to understand the true scale of Nazi crimes. In London, Paris, and New York, celebrations erupted wherever people dared to believe the nightmare was finally ending. But in Washington, no one was celebrating. Behind closed doors, leaders understood a terrifying truth. The war's most dangerous chapter was still unwritten. Across the vast Pacific Ocean, Japan continued to fight with a determination that stunned even the most experienced American generals. Defeat in Europe had changed nothing in Tokyo. Every island captured by American forces came at an enormous cost. Beaches were stained red with blood. Jungles echoed with screams, gunfire, and desperation. Soldiers fought hand to hand, often refusing to surrender even when wounded or surrounded. Many American troops returned home carrying memories that haunted them for the rest of their lives. Memories of friends lost, of brutal combat, of death that never seemed to end. Intelligence reports arriving daily at the White House painted a grim picture. If the United States invaded the Japanese mainland, the casualties would be unimaginable. Military planners estimated that hundreds of thousands of American soldiers could die in the first months alone. Millions of Japanese civilians, men, women, and children, would be caught in the firestorm. Entire cities would become battlegrounds. The invasion would not just be a military operation. It would be a slaughter on a scale the world had never seen. This was not just another military problem. This was a moral nightmare. Inside secure rooms guarded by armed soldiers, America's leaders debated a question that had no clean answer. Maps covered the walls. Casualty numbers were written, erased, and rewritten. How do you end a war when the enemy refuses to surrender? How do you save lives without destroying the very idea of humanity? The silence in those rooms was often louder than any explosion on the battlefield, broken only by the quiet voices of men who knew history was watching them. Far from the front lines, hidden beyond barbed wire, armed checkpoints, and layers of secrecy, an extraordinary project was nearing completion. It did not exist on public maps. Its name was never spoken aloud outside secure facilities. Letters sent from the location were heavily censored or never delivered at all. Scientists vanished from universities, leaving behind unfinished lectures, abandoned research, and confused students. Even their families were given vague explanations, told only that their loved ones were serving the nation in an important but classified way. This project was different from anything America had ever attempted. It was not about tanks, battleships, or faster planes. It was about unlocking the fundamental forces of nature itself. At the center of this effort were men who understood exactly what they were playing with. Physicists, chemists, and engineers who had once believed science was meant to improve human life now found themselves racing to build something that could end it on a scale never imagined. Many were immigrants who had escaped Europe just in time, haunted by what they had seen under Nazi rule. They feared that if they did not succeed, another nation eventually would, and that the weapon might be used without restraint or mercy. Days blurred into nights as calculations filled chalkboards and arguments filled the air. Equations were erased and rewritten countless times. Could the energy locked inside an atom really be controlled? Could it be released in a predictable way? Could it be delivered without destroying everything around it, including the people who built it? No one had ever tried before. There was no history to guide them, only theory, fear, and immense pressure from above. Every experiment carried risk. Every test brought them closer to a point of no return. Some scientists quietly worried that the explosion might be far greater than expected. Others feared it could ignite the atmosphere itself, setting the sky on fire and ending life on Earth. These concerns were discussed in serious meetings, calculated, debated, and ultimately set aside. The war demanded answers, not doubts. Time was running out. Each day the war continued. Thousands more died across Asia. Cities burned. Families were shattered. The military demanded results. Politicians demanded certainty. The president demanded an end to the war. In this environment, hesitation was dangerous, and doubt was a luxury few could afford. As progress accelerated, secrecy intensified. Armed guards were posted everywhere. Code names replaced real words. Entire sections of the project were isolated from one another. Even within the program, many workers had no idea what they were truly building. They assembled components without understanding the whole, unaware that their hands were shaping the most dangerous weapon humanity had ever conceived. Meanwhile, Japan prepared its people for a final stand. Civilians were trained to fight invading forces. Schools taught children how to use weapons. Propaganda declared that death was preferable to surrender. The idea of giving up was unthinkable. To American planners watching from afar, the message was terrifyingly clear. This war would not end on its own. It would only end when something forced it to stop. The weapon being developed promised a solution so absolute that it frightened even those who supported it. One strike, they believed, could force surrender. One moment could replace years of bloodshed. One decision could save countless lives by ending the war immediately. But deep inside, many sensed a darker truth. Such power could never be used lightly. Once unleashed, it would change war forever, and possibly humanity itself. By the spring of 1945, the project entered its final phase. The device was almost ready. The theories had been tested as far as science allowed, but no one truly knew what would happen when it was activated. This would not be a test like any other. This would be a leap into the unknown, taken by a world desperate for an end to suffering. Orders began to move quietly through the chain of command. Pilots were selected for a special mission. They were told it was critical to national security, but not why. Crews trained relentlessly, repeating procedures again and again, unaware of the true nature of what they would soon carry. Even many senior generals did not fully grasp the scale of what was about to occur. At the highest level of government, the final decision loomed. Use the weapon and end the war in an instant, or reject it and prepare for an invasion that could kill hundreds of thousands. There was no path without blood, only different kinds of loss. The weight of that choice pressed heavily on those responsible for making it. As the device was prepared, those closest to it felt history closing in. Some scientists wrote letters they never sent. Others stared at the desert sky, wondering if they were witnessing the final moments of the old world. The weapon they had built promised peace, but it was a peace born from terror, destruction, and irreversible change. In quiet moments, a single thought echoed through many minds. What happens after this? No one had an answer. Because once this weapon was used, the world would enter an age where destruction could fall from the sky in a single blinding flash. An age where entire cities could vanish in seconds. An age where fear itself would become a weapon, shaping politics, wars, and the future of civilization. As summer approached, the plans were finalized. The device was ready. The aircraft stood waiting on the runway, and humanity stood unknowingly on the edge of a new era. What came next would shock the world, end a global war, and leave a scar so deep that even decades later, it would still haunt our collective conscience. Because America's deadliest weapon was no longer a theory. It was about to become history. The moment arrived without warning. The morning sky was calm, almost painfully peaceful, as if the world itself had no idea what was about to happen. Soft clouds drifted lazily across the blue, untouched by fear or urgency. High above, the aircraft moved steadily through the air, its engines humming with the familiar sound of countless missions before it. Nothing about the flight felt unusual. No alarms. No sudden maneuvers. Just routine. Inside the plane, the crew followed their orders with discipline and silence. They focused on instruments, checklists, and timing, unaware that history was riding silently beneath their feet. None of them could see the faces below. None could hear the lives continuing as normal. In that moment, the distance between heaven and hell was measured in seconds. Below them, a city was waking up. People prepared breakfast in small kitchens. Shop owners unlocked doors. Trains ran on schedule. Children walked through streets that had survived years of war, laughing, arguing, dreaming of futures they believed still existed. No alarms screamed. No fighter planes filled the sky. The war had taught them fear, but this morning felt ordinary. Safe. To those on the ground, it was just another day in a world already exhausted by conflict. Then, in a single instant, everything changed. A flash brighter than the sun tore through the sky. Light swallowed the city before sound could even exist. For a fraction of a second, time itself seemed to stop. Human shadows were burned into walls, staircases, and streets, permanent reminders of lives erased in an instant. The air turned into fire. Stone melted. Steel twisted. The ground trembled as if the earth itself had been struck by a god. The weapon had been unleashed. In that moment, World War II ended in a way no one had ever imagined. Not with armies clashing, not with flags raised on battlefields, but with a single explosion that rewrote the meaning of power forever. The destruction was total, absolute, and terrifyingly fast. Entire neighborhoods vanished. Buildings collapsed as if made of paper. Tens of thousands of human lives were erased before they could even understand what was happening. Those who survived the initial blast emerged into a nightmare beyond comprehension. The sky had turned dark, choked with smoke and ash. Fires raged everywhere, merging into a single wall of flame. A strange rain began to fall, thick, black, and poisonous, coating skin, clothing, and ruins alike. People wandered through the devastation in shock, their clothes burned, their bodies injured, calling out for loved ones who would never answer. Hospitals had been destroyed. Doctors and nurses who survived struggled to help the wounded, but they were overwhelmed instantly. They encountered injuries they had never seen before. Skin burned without flames. Hair fell out in clumps. Bodies weakened without visible wounds. Something invisible was killing them slowly, silently, mercilessly. No one yet understood radiation. News of the explosion reached the world within hours. At first, many refused to believe it. One bomb destroying an entire city sounded impossible, like propaganda or exaggeration. Military experts searched desperately for explanations. Politicians demanded confirmation. Journalists struggled to describe what words could barely capture. When the truth became undeniable, a chilling realization spread across every nation on Earth. Humanity had entered a new age. America announced that it possessed a weapon of unprecedented power, unlike anything ever used in warfare. The statement was brief, calculated, and cold. It declared that this weapon could be used again if the war did not end immediately. The message carried no emotion, no apology, no hesitation. Surrender or face annihilation. Days later, the world witnessed it again. Another city, another calm morning, another flash that shattered reality itself, another explosion that turned homes, schools, and hospitals into ash. Any remaining doubt disappeared. This was no accident. This was not a one-time event. This was a demonstration, a warning written in fire. Japan surrendered shortly afterward. The war was over. In the United States, celebrations erupted almost instantly. Church bells rang. Streets filled with cheering crowds. Soldiers were finally coming home. Families reunited. A nation exhausted by years of sacrifice, rationing, and grief finally breathed again. To many Americans, the weapon was seen as a terrible necessity, a force that had ended the war quickly and saved countless lives that would have been lost in an invasion. Victory had been achieved. But as the cheering faded, uncomfortable questions began to surface. What had it truly cost? Photographs slowly emerged, showing cities reduced to shadows and ashes. Stories surfaced of survivors suffering long after the blast, their bodies failing in slow and painful ways. People who had seemed unharmed died weeks later. Children were born with illnesses no one could explain. The weapon's effects did not end when the explosion faded. They lingered, invisible, relentless, unforgiving. Even some of the scientists who had helped create the weapon felt horror. They had succeeded beyond their worst fears. What was once conceived as a desperate wartime solution had now become a permanent threat hanging over humanity. Other nations understood this immediately. If America had unlocked this power, others would seek it too. And they did. A race began, not for peace, but for the ability to destroy. The Cold War was born in the shadow of that explosion. Stockpiles of nuclear weapons grew. Each new generation became stronger, faster, and deadlier. Cities were no longer seen only as places of life and culture, but as potential targets. Maps were drawn with circles of destruction. Children grew up practicing drills for attacks everyone hoped would never come. The fear was constant, quiet, global, and inescapable. This weapon no longer needed to be used to be effective. Its existence alone was enough. Decades passed, yet the terror never fully disappeared. Generations who had never experienced World War II still lived under the threat created by its ending. World leaders spoke carefully. Conflicts were measured in words as much as weapons. One mistake, one misunderstanding, one moment of pride could trigger destruction on a scale impossible to contain. The weapon that ended a war had become a guardian of fear. Even today, its legacy shapes the modern world. Nations still measure power by how close they stand to that level of destruction. Treaties are signed, broken, and rewritten in its name. Technology evolves, but the core truth remains unchanged. Once humanity learned how to unlock the power of the atom, there was no going back. The weapon that once promised peace through force now stands as a constant reminder of how fragile civilization truly is. It proves that intelligence without restraint can become the greatest danger of all. Some argue it was necessary. Others call it the greatest crime in human history. The debate continues, unresolved, emotional, and eternal. But one fact is undeniable. This weapon changed everything. It ended World War II, but it also began an era where the survival of humanity depends on restraint, wisdom, and fear of our own creations. It taught the world that there are forces so powerful that using them even once can shape centuries. And now, after decades of history, after wars won and lost, after treaties signed and broken, one truth remains. The most dangerous weapon ever created is not made of metal or fire. It is the human decision to use it, and that decision will echo through history forever. Because power without responsibility is the deadliest legacy of all. The world will never forget. The world will never be the same. This is the end,